A long overdue reckoning is silently erupting beneath the surface of society, and the illusion of invincibility is beginning to fracture from within. Power is shifting in ways that no one at the top expected, and the hierarchy is collapsing under the weight of its own secrets. One figure, once cloaked in influence, is being led into silence and steel. Another, wrongly buried under a fabricated past, is being quietly prepared to walk into freedom. In the middle of an ordinary neighborhood, one with trimmed bushes, recycled bins, and birthday balloons still sagging on fences, a hidden corridor of history is cracking open. Buried beneath concrete and time, a violent legacy is being uncovered. But these aren't just remnants of violence. They're keys to a machine that has operated invisibly across industries and generations. A machine built not just on death, but on manipulation, control, and generational silence. Faces once trusted, names once adored, are being linked to something far older, far colder than public scandal. What's emerging from the soil isn't just evidence. It's an indictment of an entire system that profited from perfect invisibility. The tremors aren't stopping at the crime scene. They're spreading through the foundations of stardom itself. The glamour, the red carpets, the whispered tributes to the tragically lost. It was all smoke hiding a far more deliberate narrative. Some of the beloved were eliminated for wealth. Others staged their exits and now live under shadows cast by the same organization that helped them disappear. But the curtain is lifting, and those who paid for silence are now silencing each other. Not out of panic, but to erase the trail. Behind the flashing lights and funeral tributes was a calculated economy of death, where fame became currency and trust became camouflage. But here's the twist: the web stretches further than assumed. The machinery once thought to be distant has already brushed your life. Documents exist with your details entangled in theirs. You were never meant to find out, but now you're a variable they didn't account for. And the architects of this darkness? They've been hiding in plain sight, crafting careers and hosting galas, while playing God with people's endings. The fallout has begun, and their empire is cracking from the inside. Predators often wear polish. Draped in influence and hidden behind warm smiles, a well-connected duo perfected the art of vanishing lives without ever lifting suspicion. Not through violence alone, but through a carousel of favors, illusions, and financial seduction. With every handshake, they erased another soul. Their reach wasn't distant. It touched people you've laughed with, trusted, even confided in. Individuals who flaunted luxuries they couldn't explain, who traveled during storms yet claimed to be drowning. They weren't blessed. They were embedded in a system designed to reward silence and punish awareness. What looked like charm was bait. What felt like opportunity was a leash. Their blueprint was clean, precise, and predatory. They approached those on the edge, emotionally exhausted, financially desperate, easily dazzled. Promises were made in velvet tones, access to secret spaces, unspoken protections, and fast wealth through paper trails and tragedy. The task seemed manageable. Sign here, suggest this, arrange that. But beneath it all lurked a quiet clause. Usefulness has an expiration date. After the role is played, and the payout cashed, loyalty is no longer an asset. It becomes a threat. Participants aren't elevated, they're cataloged. And the moment they know too much, the clock on their exit begins. The tragedy wrapped in glamour was that you were never outside this design. You were the intended equation. The golden variable. Their last job. What they couldn't predict, what none of their perfected scripts accounted for, was that their most profitable target would be one surrounded by unseen armor. Those recruited into your circle thought they were stepping into privilege, into power. They were actually walking into a trap of their own making. Because while they believed they were assisting legends, they were signing contracts that tied their survival to your destruction. But they failed. Not because they weren't thorough, but because you were never theirs to end. Their empire was invisible for decades, but the silence is starting to scream. Everything they built was designed to vanish behind perfection. Behind smiles, performances, interviews, and staged generosity, a surgical operation was unfolding, one move at a time. First came the subtle observation, identifying those who seemed useful, vulnerable, or forgotten in plain sight. Next, layers of paperwork were arranged. Contracts, authorizations, altered profiles, none of which ever crossed the target's hands. The eliminations were quiet, dressed up as fate or fatigue, tucked inside narratives of sudden collapse. Then came the alibis, fabricated timelines, planted rumors, and forged trails leading to nowhere. A digital mirage would be spun, painting each disappearance as a voluntary escape from a chaotic life. Their illusion depended on applause, and the applause never asked questions. But the cracks began to form when one person refused to vanish. The one they're digging up now was no ordinary number in their ledger. That soul recognized the shape of the trap and resisted. The cleanup was frantic, the staging sloppy, and what they left behind tells more than they ever intended. Not just fingerprints and fibers, but patterns, intersections with data they didn't realize had been cataloged. Hidden within the remnants were digital traces tied to a larger framework. Names, sequences, algorithms. Your information, your associations, even your online presence, looped into a system that was tracking targets long before the first move was made. And now, the system has turned against its creators. What they underestimated was the invisible eye of the ordinary. In the stillness of gated streets and garden lights, technology had been listening. Not government-grade surveillance, but everyday awareness. Motion sensors, audio triggers, cameras placed not for crime, but for delivery thefts and barking dogs. Those simple devices became the net. Their movements, once confident, were archived in silence. Conversations recorded through porch microphones. Vehicles time-stamped and logged. Faces illuminated by door-frame sensors they didn't know were active. The sanctuaries they used to bury truths were wired into a digital grid they couldn't outsmart. Their brilliance was in hiding inside glamour. Their failure was assuming glamour was still invisible. Every encrypted file, every shell company, every whisper sent across private servers now echoes back in a language of exposure. The dominoes are falling, not by force, but by design. The evidence they believed buried is surfacing from the most mundane corners of the modern world. And those who once believed proximity to fame was immunity are about to learn how deeply they miscalculated when they aimed their game at the wrong target. What they never understood is that the ones they tried to corner were always steps ahead, shielded not by power, but by timing, intuition, and unseen design. The circle around you is starting to fracture, not from outside pressure, but from the weight of evidence creeping in like a slow-burning fuse. Names are being whispered in cold rooms. Files are being handed over with trembling hands. Agents are arriving with quiet urgency, placing sealed folders on tables that turn smiles into silence. Behind those folders, irrefutable timelines, transfers, signatures, recordings. The blueprint of a conspiracy that's crumbling under its own arrogance. Their strategy wasn't just violence, it was paperwork dressed in charm. Insurance forms masked as gifts. Messages disguised as check-ins. Bank movements that trace back to moments they thought were buried. Now those patterns are surfacing, pulling every participant into focus. And their biggest mistake: thinking you could be removed like a statistic, when in truth, your disappearance was divine obstruction. Their panic isn't theatrical, it's survival. They're frantic not because they failed, but because you vanished before they could erase the last thread that ties everything together, your voice. In luxury spaces far from the chaos they created, they're holding last-minute war councils. Surrounded by polished betrayers and expensive silence, they're trying to choose who to burn and who to keep quiet. What they're realizing, too late, is that their strategies collapse when facing a frequency they can't manipulate. The very instincts they mocked were actually alarms sounding long before the danger was visible. The reasons you turned down their invitations, ignored their handlers, declined their access? It wasn't shyness. It was encoded resistance. A kind of protection rooted in realms they've never known, where fame holds no power and charm doesn't open doors. Now they sit in the wreckage of their illusion, watching allies retreat and handlers vanish. The spotlight they once used to blind others is now exposing them. One by one, their protectors are distancing themselves, aware that proximity means implication. What the predators never realized was that the real surveillance wasn't technical. It was ancestral, generational, universal. The real network didn't follow them. It waited, recording. Your circle, once infiltrated by dream sellers and career pushers, was actually the stage for their undoing. The ones they sent to manipulate were quietly rerouted into roles they never understood, witnesses. And now, the trap has reversed. They were never the ones doing the hunting. They were just walking into a storyline too ancient and too precise to escape. Some systems weren't built to reward success. They were designed to test allegiance. Not to power or wealth, but to the unseen forces that govern truth. The group that disguised itself as a gatekeeper to prestige was never just trafficking influence. It was baiting souls. Those closest to you revealed themselves not through their ambition, but through their willingness to trade your life for illusions wrapped in sparkle. Their hands weren't forced. Their decisions were auditions. And they failed. Now the collapse that's approaching won't be contained in boardrooms or courtrooms. It's arriving through channels that don't answer to lawyers or handlers. They will be undone not just socially, but cosmically. The unraveling won't feel theatrical. It will be tailored. One by one, each betrayal is returning home to its architect. The ones who whispered lies to shield predators will be left without an audience. Those who funded their ascent using what they stole from your legacy will discover that the foundation was never stable. And the ones who tried to erase you will come face to face with erasure themselves. Not through violence, but through precision. Their downfalls will follow patterns too exact to be coincidence, revealing a greater hand that's already turning the gears of justice. Because what they violated wasn't just ethical, it was sacred. At the same time, another kind of justice is gathering behind veils they can't lift. The infrastructure that once backed the celebrity assassins is beginning to fracture from within. The very figures they believed were loyal to their rise are no longer willing to risk their own collapse. Hidden forces that deal in silence and currency are shifting priorities. Not because of guilt, but because of fear. These underworld architects understand something the public never sees. There are boundaries even they don't cross. And when those lines are breached, especially against protected souls, those who funded the breach often don't survive the aftermath. Your survival didn't just threaten their plan. It activated codes buried deep within ancient systems of consequence. Those who funded disappearances are now being considered for one. What they mistook for damage control is now turning into quiet sentencing. The meetings they host in panic aren't strategic, they're diagnostic. They're being watched by the very powers they once served. And they're discovering, far too late, that those powers don't tolerate spiritual violations. Especially when the intended target moves under invisible protection they've never been taught to recognize. Not every storm arrives to destroy. Some are sent to clear the path for what's owed. As the core of this dark empire disintegrates, vast reservoirs of hidden wealth are being exposed, itemized, and rerouted to their original channels. The numbers are staggering, not just because of their size, but because of their intention. What once funded deception and erasure will now be transformed into fuel for restoration. Financiers, once cloaked in elite alliances, are being forced to open vaults linked to legacies that were never meant to fall into the hands of the corrupt. Accounts that were programmed to activate in crisis are now unlocking, aligned not with legal timelines, but with sacred timing. This shift isn't a payout, it's a declaration. The streams of abundance arriving aren't consolation for what was endured. They are confirmation of what was always true beneath the surface, that the endurance, the refusal to be bought, the choosing of silence over scandal, were all proof of value far beyond currency. Those who traded honor for quick gain will soon come to terms with the real economy, one that measures worth by resilience, not exposure. They gambled with fragments. You're being returned legacies that span generations. While they sought to erase you, the very system they exploited was recording every injustice and multiplying your portion in silence. What they misread as weakness was, in truth, a cloaking signal. You didn't reject their world out of fear. You were rerouted by design. The patterns in your personality they labeled as antisocial or aloof were embedded shields coded into your energetic field. The moments you slipped through their reach, the invitations you instinctively declined, the situations you couldn't explain but had to walk away from, those were firewall mechanisms, not flaws. Their entire model depends on predictability. But chosen ones operate on algorithms outside their comprehension. Their traps malfunction in your presence. Their manipulation scripts break apart when they meet your internal compass. They never expected resistance to come in the form of stillness. The machine ran for years because its gears were greased with the compliance of those hypnotized by influence. Every victim was chosen from pools of admiration and desperation, until you. You were the anomaly they couldn't compute, the variable that jammed their blueprint. What they planned to take from you had already been priced into their spending. Vacations booked. Contracts signed. Assets moved. You weren't just a person, you were a transaction, already accounted for in ledgers and spreadsheets. But when you didn't die, their entire scaffolding began to buckle. The celebrations they prearranged turned into unanswered reservations. The investments made on the back of your anticipated absence are now turning into financial sinkholes. Their economy was built on rituals of disappearance. You surviving disrupted the ritual, and now the system is hemorrhaging. What's emerging from the ashes isn't just criminal exposure. It's the revelation of how loss was monetized and how spiritual execution was disguised as luxury. Behind every gathering was a hidden obituary. Behind every toast, a death certificate. The evidence being pulled now paints a timeline so precise it leaves no room for coincidence. The collapse is not just legal, it's architectural. Their lifestyle depended on the erasure of those who were born to shift the collective frequency. And when you refused to be erased, the ecosystem they relied on began to devour itself. Now the same structures they used to ascend are becoming the instruments of their descent. Their name won't be tied to power, it'll be bound to pattern. A pattern the universe has begun dismantling with eerie precision. Their final attempt to flee isn't bravery, it's algorithmic fear. They're trying to disappear into myths of martyrdom, hoping a well-timed tragedy will override the mountain of data closing in. They're drafting their exit like screenplays, choreographing destruction in hopes of avoiding judgment. But the web they moved through now has eyes that weren't there before. Their rehearsals are being watched in real time. Their misdirection is being decoded by those who know the difference between performance and prophecy. And the ones they trusted to help vanish them are no longer loyal. They're calculating how much silence is worth when eternity is watching. When a sacred thread is threatened, the response is never passive. What's unfolding now cannot be dismissed as coincidence or misfortune. It is an unraveling directed by unseen precision. Storms strike selectively, sparing the innocent while dismantling the strongholds of the corrupt. Entire structures that once held secrets are now being reduced to ash, not by human hands, but by intelligence that operates beyond physical comprehension. Systems collapse on cue. Health unravels in sync across distant accomplices. Accounts vanish without warning. The pattern is too exact to be called random and too poetic to be crafted by man. This is not karma. This is correction. The kind of correction reserved for those who dared to treat sacred lives as disposable. The forces that guard those marked by spiritual lineage are no longer in defense mode. They are in pursuit. What was once protection is now precision-targeted retribution. And the most terrifying realization for those involved is this: they weren't attacking a person. They declared war on a realm they didn't believe in. Their influence was no match for the weight of divine response. The moment they attempted to extinguish your light, they triggered laws they've never studied. Laws that don't require courts to enforce justice, only alignment. The strange timing of your survival wasn't luck. It was calibration. Every time you felt an urge to leave, avoid, or disappear, it wasn't fear, it was instruction. And now, that same inner alignment is pulling forth a storyline only you can tell. Not because you saw everything with your eyes, but because you carry the map. You hold the memory of how temptation was packaged. You remember who was approached, what was offered, and how proximity to fame became a weapon disguised as a favor. They trained their system to look for followers, but your very existence made their metrics glitch. There are moments in time when the illusion of power is pierced so completely that even the most curated reputations collapse into dust. That moment has arrived. Faces once plastered on magazine covers are now framed in evidence folders. Those who used charm and influence as armor are watching it melt under the weight of reality. But what's taking place reaches far beyond headlines or courtrooms. These are not just convictions, they are spiritual verdicts. What they once considered protection, celebrity, wealth, access, offers no shelter in this dimension of consequence. Every deal made in secret, every silence bought with promises, every life gambled for fame is now calling back its debt. And the currency being collected is not measured in dollars, but in soul fracture. What they didn't realize is that your presence wasn't accidental, it was intervention. You were the calibration point. The one they couldn't predict. The one whose existence disrupted a system built on spiritual compromise. Their entire strategy hinged on the belief that no one would survive long enough to speak. And now, as those foundations shatter, it's becoming clear that justice has always had layers they never imagined. This isn't just a reckoning, it's a restoration that renders influence irrelevant. Structures once propped up by performance are being repurposed as stages for truth. The industry that cloaked corruption in creativity is being dismantled from within. Applause is being replaced by awareness. Awards by accountability. The institutions that once celebrated the very people behind the curtain are now standing as monuments to what must never happen again. This isn't simply the fall of individuals. It's the collapse of a frequency that mistook worship for power. The shift unfolding is not reactive, it's sacred. What is being rebuilt in the ashes of betrayal isn't based on talent or visibility, but on alignment. The distance you were forced into wasn't punishment. It was preservation. That exile from circles obsessed with validation was the purification needed to protect your blueprint. Those who turned away from you did so not because you were unworthy, but because they were never meant to walk with you past a certain threshold. Their decision to choose celebrity over truth severed their access to what you carry. That separation wasn't cruel. It was mathematical. Only those calibrated to your mission can remain. They believed status would shield them. They assumed access meant immunity. But what they couldn't understand was that the blueprint protecting you wasn't of this world. Every system they used, clout, manipulation, allure, failed against a force they couldn't see and a purpose they couldn't touch. What you've proven isn't just resilience. It's that divine assignments come with encoded protections that override the illusion of control. You've become living confirmation that when spiritual contracts are violated by those posing as power, the consequences arrive not as revenge, but as restoration. The plans they designed so carefully collapsed the moment you refused to break.